And welcome back to the YouTube channel of the Pop Culture Lens, the podcast that offers fresh perspectives on past media. My name is Christopher Olson, and with me in this video is friend of the podcast and unofficial third co-host of the Pop Culture Lens, Joe Belfeuil. Joe, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. And newcomer to the Pop Culture Lens podcast, longtime listener, first-time guest, Chris Loseke.
Hello.
How you doing, Chris?
Great.
Good. So, it's been a while since we've had any content up on the YouTube channel for the Pop Culture Lens. So we're in the middle of the weekend for C2E2, the comic. What is it? The Chicago Comic and Entertainment Expo, which takes place every year around this time. And we've been kind of geeking out and nerding out, and we just finished watching the bad movie Trancers, which we all kind of love. And we decided to record this very short video to sort of talk about why bad movies are worthwhile, why so many people seem to love bad movies, because there's a very large contingent of people that seems to really, really enjoy bad movies. And then maybe talk about some movies that we think are kind of worthwhile. So I'm going to put that question out there to both of you. Who would like to be the first one to answer that? Why are bad movies worth watching?
I can go first.
All right.
One of the reasons why I think that they're worth watching, or at least even worth visiting, is that you can't really appreciate a good movie without having a bad movie exist, so you have sort of something to compare it to. So, I mean, granted, you would never really compare Citizen Kane to The Room, but yet there's a video out there of when Tommy is busting up the room of when Kane breaks the room as well. So
yeah, and I mean, The Room has been kind of called the Citizen Kane of bad movies, so there is that. Chris, you watch a lot of bad movies too.
Yeah, I do.
Why do you like watching bad movies?
I would say that a lot of them have good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
They just may or may not be executed very well, so sometimes they have some good thoughts and things that they could do, and they just didn't do it.
There was a panel at C2E2 about that today, wasn't there, that you were telling us about?
Yep, they had a bad movies that deserve a good reboot.
Okay. And for a very long time, I have said that somewhere buried within all the badness, there's a really cool movie about zombies, or aliens using zombies to try to take over the world in Plan 9 from
That
outer space.
came up in the panel. That's
Did
exactly what they said, is that it's a very good idea and it's just executed extraordinarily poorly.
And yeah, and I think if somebody were to take that little kernel of the idea and do something with it, it could be a really interesting, like exploitation style sci-fi horror film.
Absolutely.
I think for me, one of the reasons why I like bad movies, one, it's just fun. If you get a group of like-minded people together, like ourselves, and you watch a bad movie, you can have a good time just, cracking each other up and trying to figure out what in the hell led to this movie being made. For instance, we watched the Neil Breen masterpiece Pass Through last night, and this reaction right here is what was entertaining me, because I've seen every single Neil Breen film, and if you've never seen a Neil Breen film, no, dude. They're these amazing pieces of outsider art that make absolutely no sense, but they're very, very, very entertaining in a lot of ways. But watching these two watch this Neil Breen movie was kind of amazing and kind of fun for me. So I think they can give people this sense of camaraderie and enjoyment in a lot of ways. But I also think, when we talk bad movies, and this is something else I just want to ask real quick, what exactly is a bad movie? Because that gets tossed around a lot. But what is it that makes a bad movie a worthwhile bad movie?
a lot of it is incompetence. And it's terrible to say that, because it's not like I'm gonna go out and make a movie and it's gonna be aces or anything, but like the Neil Breen movie that we watched last night, the performances were very bizarre, the writing was bizarre. What threw me off the most was the editing, the way that the scenes flowed.
Wait, they flowed?
Well, okay, the way that they were kind of crammed together.
That's probably a better way of putting it.
If you're used to watching, really anything that makes any kind of sense, this is very jarring to watch. Where they're one moment they're having a conversation outside in the desert, and then the next they're like in a camper, and it's the same conversation that's happening. So it's like, did they just stop in the middle of the conversation, get up suddenly, and then walk into where they were, and then sit down and start talking again? But
It's like David Bordwell says, man. We're supposed to be filling in those blanks.
Yeah, no, sometimes not. But I mean, bless their hearts for trying to make a film. They have far more courage than I do in that respect, and money. But that's kind of what it is. It's sort of the amateurism and the incompetence in making.
There's something interesting about watching somebody try and fail miserably, and seeing that, which is what makes a movie like that, where you know that they were trying to do something good and didn't do it, versus a self-aware one where they're trying to make a bad movie and those don't work as well.
And I like that idea of the self-aware bad movie. I mean, that's something I kind of rail against in a lot of ways, because so many times those ready-made cult films, stuff like Snakes on a Plane and things like that, just are not Sharknado. They're just not worth watching, because they're so tongue-in-cheek that all of the charm kind of goes out the window. Like what you're saying, that idea of watching someone try and fail. We all try and fail every single day of our lives. Not just the three of us, but everybody. But most of us don't have that
recorded and released for other people to watch over and over again and to mock.
Yeah, exactly. And so when somebody's trying so hard to make this thing that they have invested so much of themselves in, it kind of becomes endearing in some ways. You know, Ed Wood was probably one of, he was one of the most competent filmmakers of all time, but there's like this earnestness to all of his films, and this like, I'm making something great here, that just makes them really charming and entertaining and fun in a lot of ways. And I think, when we also talk like bad movies, we're talking, a lot of times we're kind of talking cult films, or films from like a different era, because I think there are some people who would classify stuff like Death Race 2000 as a bad movie, or Escape from New York as a bad movie. I just listened to a How Did This Get Made podcast, and there were a couple people who were saying that Escape from New York was not good. But they still enjoyed it. They still found a lot of enjoyment in the film. And I think with movies like Death Race 2000 and Escape from LA and things like that, I find those interesting because the directors and the writers can sort of sneak these little subversive things in them, more so than you could do in a big studio film. Like you look at the like you were talking about this earlier, the remake of Death Race 2000, not the 2050, but the Jason Statham one.
Yeah, the one was what was it?
Just Death Race.
Yeah. It was like I'm trying to remember the name of the director now.
Paul W.S. Anderson.
Thank you. It's Paul W.S. Anderson, and a lot of his films just don't have that subversiveness that like the original Death Race had.
Yeah. Well, and they're also just kind of bland and boring.
Yeah, there's really no. I mean, it's got Jason Statham in it, and that's all I can really remember about it. Like, I can't really remember any of the action sequences or anything like that. But you would think with a title like Death Race, you would get something kind of cool and fun, but it's just sort of a slog and kind of boring. And that's kind of the worst thing that a bad movie could be, is just boring. It's just something that it fills in an hour 45, and the second you leave the theater or you hit stop on whatever device you're watching it on, it doesn't leave an impression. You don't really remember it.
Mm-hmm. And I know you guys haven't seen it yet, but I watched the Death Race 2050, the Roger Corman produced sort of pseudo sequel / remake of Death Race, and it's no great film, but I enjoyed the hell out of it, and it's really, really memorable. It's never really kind of bland and boring. It stands out, as opposed to something that just feels kind of like a cookie cutter movie churned off of the assembly line, like a lot of big budget sort of bad movies are. Did you have anything else to add onto that? All right.
I don't think so.
So, do you have any movies that you like, any bad movies that you think are really kind of worthwhile, that our viewers here might be interested in checking out or should check out for whatever reason?
There's a lot of them, but I know it's pretty fresh in my mind. But Samurai Cop, Riff Tracks just did a live episode or like a live thing about a week or two ago, and the movie there's no real samurai in it, and there's barely even a cop. There's a few like videos that are out there that I think one of the more famous scenes in the movie is the hospital scene.
Yeah.
Which is the dialogue between our hero, Joe from San Diego, and a nurse that is there, and he is trying to hit on her, and he is shooting her down, or he's shooting him down horribly, and the reaction of his sidekick that they kind of keep cutting away to, that's amazing, and it's cracking him up right now, so I definitely highly recommend it. It's about 90 minutes. It has Robert Zadar as the big bad in it. If you know who Robert Zadar is, great. If you don't, it is ZDAR. He's also Z apostrophe DAR. He has been in many, many B movies.
Tango and Cash.
Yes.
Hell Comes to Frogtown 2.
Mm-hmm.
Soul Taker.
He's the maniac cop.
He's the maniac cop.
Yep.
So yeah, Samurai Cop is great.
Mm-hmm.
You showed me that one, and
Yeah.
that it just kind of blew my mind. Like when the way you guys were watching the Neil Breen movie, that was kind of me watching Samurai Cop. Chris, did you have any movies that you would kind of recommend to people? I mean, I know you're like a proponent of things like Battlefield Earth and some other things.
I like Battlefield Earth a lot. My recommendation would be, and there's some nostalgia to it, so take it with a grain of salt, but Howard the Duck is my favorite bad movie. It's a legendary flop, but I love it. And it's got a great duck little puppet in it. At least sometimes it's great. When it's a guy in a suit, it's not as great. But the duck puppet's good, and he fights a big monster at the end, and how often do you see a duck driving around a go-kart with a laser gun fighting a giant monster? Not very often, and I love it.
And it's a Marvel movie.
It is not technically in the Marvel universe.
Well, Howard is now.
That movie isn't, but I hope somehow they find a way to tie it in. I'm waiting for that to happen.
I'm a big fan of Howard the Duck as well, and unironically, I think it's a very funny movie in a lot of ways. The scene where they go to the Western sushi joint or whatever it is, and that waitress, the Cajun sushi joint, that is one of the funniest scenes. It is so good, and then Tim Robbins is just fantastic in that movie. I could like go on and on and on recommending bad movies because I'm writing a whole book on cult movies. I've got a whole appendix on like 10 great movies that are so bad they're good. I could just go on and on and on, but I think one that I will narrow it down to in this video would be Zardoz. We've talked about this on the podcast before. We mentioned it. I think we mentioned it during the V for Vendetta episode of the podcast. But it is a completely bonkers film. How did this get made? The podcast, How Did This Get Made, did a really great episode about it, and they had such a hard time trying to figure out exactly what was going on in the film. I think it's not quite as difficult to parse out as they make it. But it's a really interesting science fiction film, and it's a really interesting movie in terms of like independent filmmaking because it was written, directed, and produced by John Borman, the director of Excalibur and Point Blank and a number of other films. And it's a very just incredibly singular vision and a weird vision at that. And Sean Connery runs around in a loincloth and bandoliers through most of the movie. So if that doesn't sell you on this film, I don't know what will. But it's also a really interesting film to watch now in terms of all the stuff that's going on with the income inequality and the haves and have-nots and whatnot. The film kind of inadvertently becomes a commentary on that in a lot of ways. So I would say Zardoz would be a bad movie that is well worth your time. Anything else that we should talk about before we wrap this up? I can't think of anything.
I don't think
Course. It's a good crash course.
It is a good crash course.
And I know you wore me down on Zardoz because every time I would be over at your place or you'd be over at mine and it'd be like, hey, let's watch something. You'd always throw Zardoz out. And then finally one time it was on Netflix and you were over. I'm like, fine, what the hell? Let's watch Zardoz. And it's crazy. So
But you liked it.
Yes. So, I mean, we'll close it with keep an open mind. I
Yeah.
mean, these are films that they might sound insane, but you may actually like them and like them unironically. I mean, we watched Trancers, as previously stated. I love it.
I do too.
I mean,
I enjoyed it.
I love Tim Thomerson, so
Very young, fresh-faced Helen Hunt appears
Yes.
in the movie, among other people. So yeah, I'm a big fan of it as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, just you know, I think bad movies. One of the things, just to sign off before to wrap things up, I think one thing that bad movies can do is show us, help us appreciate things outside of the sort of standard Hollywood blockbuster. They can
Yeah.
give us this sort of alternative thing, and even when they're bad, like really bad, maybe they're entertaining, maybe they're fun, and maybe you just get some enjoyment out of it, and that's really what it comes down to. So thank you for watching this video. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Chris, for coming on and talking about this with me. I really appreciate that. And look for a new episode of the podcast soon, and hopefully we'll have more content up on the channel that you can view. So thank you again for watching.